If you're still breathing, you can still fight. But if nobody hears you, make them see you. A trembling hand, a red circle pressed against cold glass, and a man with 50 riders at his back who made one phone call that changed everything. This is the story the media barely got right, and the truth is more stunning than any headline. Before we go further, if this story moves you, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The morning Jackson Cole decided to ride alone was the same morning that changed the rest of his life. That was not unusual riding alone. He had done it for 31 years every Tuesday before a chapter meeting, ever since he was 21 years old, and his chapter president at the time, a man named Dutch, who smelled like motor oil and cigarettes, told him, "A man who can't sit with himself on the road's got no business leading other men anywhere." Dutch had been dead for 11 years. Raven, that was what everyone called Jackson Cole, had been called that since he was a teenager, since his hair went black as coal the moment puberty hit and never came back, had been chapter president for 9 of those 11 years. And he still rode alone every Tuesday morning. The interstate was quiet at that hour. That stretch of I-90 cutting through eastern Montana had the kind of silence that felt bigger than silence. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath. The sky was the color of old pewter. The temperature hovered just above freezing. His breath fogged behind him in tiny clouds that the wind tore away immediately, and the hum of the Harley beneath him was the one constant he had trusted more than almost anything else in his life. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. That was the point of these Tuesday rides. No agenda, no problems to solve, just the road. The silver SUV pulled up alongside him somewhere around mile marker 247. He noticed it the way he noticed everything on the road, automatically cataloged and filed without conscious effort. Late model, clean, Wyoming plates. 2 figures in the front, both male, both big. Tinted rear windows. Moving at exactly the speed limit, which in his experience meant one of 2 things. Either the driver was a very cautious person, or the driver was somebody with a very specific reason not to get pulled over. He had been a biker long enough to know the difference between the 2 types of cautious. He gave the SUV a second glance. Then he looked back at the road ahead. Then something made him look again. He wasn't sure what it was. Something in the peripheral. Something that didn't fit. At the rear driver's side window of the SUV, the tint was heavy enough that you shouldn't have been able to see through it in normal light. But the morning sun had shifted at exactly that moment, hitting the glass at an angle that created a brief thin strip of visibility. Just enough. A hand. A woman's hand pressed flat against the inside of the glass. She held it there for maybe 2 seconds. Maybe less. Yet, and on the palm of that hand, drawn in red ink that was slightly smeared at the edges, was a circle. Not words, not numbers, not random doodling. A deliberate red circle. Raven's brain processed it and immediately tried to talk itself out of what it had processed. You're seeing things. It was a shadow. It was her phone screen. You're going 65 miles an hour and the light is bad and you haven't had your second cup of coffee and you are 52 years old and maybe your eyes aren't what they used to be. The SUV began to pull ahead. 1 car length. 2. Raven did not speed up. He did not slow down. He rode exactly as he had been riding. But his jaw had gone tight, and his hands on the handlebars were no longer relaxed, and somewhere in the back of his skull, behind all the reasonable voices telling him he had imagined it, there was a different voice. Older, the one that had kept him alive in 2 tours in Iraq and 31 years of riding with men who were not always on the right side of any line. That voice didn't argue. It didn't explain itself. It just said, "You know what that was?" He knew what that was. About 3 years earlier, a woman named Darnell Harris from a nonprofit called Highway Watch had come to speak at a chapter meeting. She was not the kind of person anyone expected to see at a Hells Angels meeting. Small 50s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, looked like someone's school librarian. Half the room had been skeptical. Some had been outright rude about it before she even started talking. She had stood her ground like a woman made of concrete. "I'm not here to lecture you," she had said. "I'm here because truckers have saved more trafficking victims in the last decade than almost any other group in this country. You men spend more hours on American roads than anyone. I want to teach you one thing, one signal. That's all I'm asking. She taught them the red circle. Simple enough to draw in seconds, distinctive enough not to be confused with anything else, visible through glass, usable when any sound would be too dangerous. If you ever see a hand pressed flat against a window, she had said, with a red circle on the palm, that's someone telling you they cannot say the words out loud. That's someone running out of options. Most of the room had listened politely and forgotten it by the time they hit the parking lot. Raven had not forgotten. He had thought about it maybe 100 times in 3 years, not obsessively, but in the way you think about information that lands in a place deeper than your memory, that settles into something closer to instinct. He had thought about it at gas stations when he passed family vehicles. He had thought about it on long highway stretches when he pulled up beside cargo vans. He had filed it away not as knowledge, but as a readiness. And now the SUV was 3 car lengths ahead and gaining speed, and the hand was gone from the window, and the reasonable voices in his head were getting louder. You didn't see anything. Don't do something stupid. You're 52 years old. You can't just... He picked up his radio, pressed the button, said one sentence. I need eyes on a silver SUV, Wyoming plates, heading east on I-90 near mile 247. Possible circle confirmed. Static. 3 seconds. Then a voice, Marcus, who everyone called Book because he'd read more novels than anyone they knew, came back flat and quiet. Copy, circle confirmed, meaning what? Meaning what I said. A beat. How many you need? However many are close. Another beat. Give me 15 minutes. Raven set down the radio and kept riding. He didn't speed up yet. He didn't want the SUV to know they had his attention. He wanted to be invisible for exactly as long as he needed to be. Masas, 15 minutes. He had to keep that vehicle in his line of sight for 15 minutes. He breathed through his nose, long and slow, the way Dutch had taught him to breathe when everything inside him wanted to go loud and fast and stupid. The road will wait for you, Dutch used to say. It's always waited. The question is whether you've got the patience to let it. He had the patience. He kept his distance. He watched the SUV. Inside the vehicle, Claire Whitmore was performing the most difficult act of her life, being still. Her wrists were not bound. They had taken that measure off when they stopped for gas an hour earlier after she stopped struggling. The man in the passenger seat, the one who smelled like cheap cologne and something sour beneath it, had told her calmly that if she screamed at the gas station, if she tried to run, if she did anything at all that drew attention, the woman she had been called to help a girl named Amber, supposedly a trafficking victim who had contacted Claire's volunteer organization, would be hurt. She didn't know if Amber was real. She suspected Amber wasn't real, but she couldn't take that chance, so she sat and she thought. And she had been trained years ago as part of her volunteer work in exactly the kind of moments when you cannot yell, cannot run, cannot do any of the things your instincts are screaming at you to do. The training had felt abstract at the time, practical but distant, like learning CPR on a plastic dummy. You hope you never need it. You file it away. You go on with your life. Her trainer had said, if you're ever in a situation where making noise will get you hurt, your job is to become visible, not loud. Visible, silent visibility. That's your weapon. She had been sitting in the back of that SUV for over 2 hours before she remembered the red marker. Back then, it was in the side pocket of her tote bag, which they had thrown in the back with her and hadn't bothered to search completely. They'd taken her phone. They'd taken the small canister of pepper spray she carried clipped to her keyring. They hadn't thought about the tote bag. She found the marker by feel, uncapped it slowly, and the man in the passenger seat glanced back at her twice in the next 10 minutes. Both times she was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, looking at nothing. Both times he looked away. On the third time she was sure he wasn't looking, she drew the circle on her palm. Small, neat. She pressed hard to make it dark. And then she waited for a window. Not a car window, a gap in the light, a moment when the tint would be thin enough. She almost gave up twice. And she almost capped the marker and put it back in her bag, and told herself she was being ridiculous, that nobody would see that this was a gesture that would vanish at 65 miles an hour against tinted glass. Then she heard a motorcycle. She didn't look out the window. She didn't move. She sat completely still and listened to the engine get closer, and something in her chest, not hope exactly, not yet, but something that lived in the same neighborhood, told her to wait. She waited. When the light shifted, she pressed her hand flat against the glass. She held it there. She looked. Through the reflected glare, she couldn't tell what was on the other side. She could see the outline of a rider, big man, gray beard visible under the helmet, but she couldn't see his eyes. Couldn't see if he was looking. Couldn't know if what she was doing was anything more than screaming into empty space. She held her hand there anyway. Wait, because her trainer had also said, the alternative to trying is not trying, and not trying is always worse. She held her hand there, and then the SUV began to pull ahead. She let her hand drop. She stared at the back of the passenger seat. She breathed. She waited to find out if someone had seen. The 15 minutes felt like something with physical weight. Raven kept the SUV in his eye line, holding a distance that was close enough to track and far enough to look casual. He had been on enough roads in enough situations to know how to make himself invisible. He rode like he was going somewhere entirely his own. He did not accelerate when they sped up by a few miles an hour. He adjusted gradually, naturally, the way traffic normally adjusts. He was watching the exit signs. He was watching the road shoulders. He was thinking about what 15 minutes meant. A lot could happen in 15 minutes. A lot could happen in 15 seconds. He pressed the radio again. Book, where are we? 8 riders at the Lewistown exit, 6 more coming south from Billings. Danny's got 4 at the rest stop on 212. We're triangulating. They need to come in quiet, one at a time, spread out. Already told them. Nobody does anything until I say. Nobody does anything until you say. A beat. Raven. Yeah. You sure about this? The SUV was 4 car lengths ahead, not gaining anymore, settling back into its lane. No, Raven said. I'm not sure. He put the radio down. He rode. And the thing about not being sure, he had learned this a long time ago in a place much farther from Montana than he ever wanted to think about, was that it didn't matter in the way people thought it mattered. Certainty was a luxury. Action was not. You could be completely sure and still be completely wrong, and you could be completely unsure and still be completely right. The uncertainty was not the question. The question was always simpler. Can you live with what happens if you do nothing? He already knew the answer to that question. He'd been living with a version of it for 24 years. Emily Cole had been 17 years old when she disappeared, his baby sister, 4 years younger than him. She had his mother's eyes and their father's temper and the kind of laugh that made people in restaurants turn to look, not because it was obnoxious, but because it was genuinely joyful, the way laughs used to be before people got self-conscious about being happy. She had been hitchhiking a fight with her boyfriend, a bad decision, the kind that teenagers make 10,000 times and usually survive on a highway outside Denver. That was the last confirmed sighting. No body, no evidence, no answers. His mother had died still waiting. His father had turned into a different kind of man, the kind with nothing behind the eyes long before the heart attack took him. Raven had done 3 things in the years after he had enlisted. He had come home, and he had eventually joined the chapter where he spent the next 3 decades. Not running from anything, not hiding, just living inside the one life that had made any kind of sense after everything else stopped making sense. He had never stopped thinking about what it would have meant if someone on that road had seen Emily, had seen her trying to signal, had stopped. He pressed the radio one more time. Book. Yeah. Tell them we're moving in 5. The SUV exited the highway at a ramp that wound up and over toward a 2-lane mountain road, and that was when Raven understood that the timeline had just compressed. Mountain road meant fewer witnesses. Mountain road meant the men in that vehicle were making a decision about where they were going next. Mountain road meant that whatever he was going to do, the window for doing it was closing. He stopped waiting. He hit the throttle. The Harley surged forward. On the radio, without him saying anything more, he heard Book's voice, and it was different now. Clipped focus, the voice of a man who had served his own 3 tours and knew how to shift registers when the moment shifted. All units, exit. 247, now. Raven came up beside the SUV. The driver noticed him immediately. He saw it in the subtle drift of the vehicle just a few inches toward the center line, the unconscious territorial reaction of a driver who suddenly feels crowded. Raven stayed right there, shoulder to shoulder with the SUV, and then he looked through the driver's window. The driver, late 30s, heavy-set, flat expression, looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say yet. Moha. But Raven held the man's gaze for 3 full seconds, and what passed between them in those 3 seconds was the oldest conversation in the world. The one that didn't need words. The one that was just one person telling another person as clearly as anything can be communicated between 2 human beings. I see you. I know what you're doing, and I am not going to look away. The driver looked back at the road. His knuckles, Raven noticed, had gone white on the steering wheel. And then coming over the rise ahead of them, Raven saw the first motorcycle, then 3 more, then 6. Then the road ahead began to change. Inside the SUV, the passenger, the one who smelled like cologne, said something low and sharp to the driver that Claire couldn't fully make out. The driver said something back. The passenger turned around and looked at her, and his face had a quality to it that she had not seen before in the 2 hours she had been in that vehicle, a quality that was much more frightening than his earlier calm. He looked uncertain. "Who did you contact?" he said. "I don't have my phone," Claire said. "That's not what I asked. I haven't contacted anyone." He stared at her. She stared back. She had learned in the last 2 hours in the hardest classroom of her life that showing fear to men like this was not the same as having fear. She had the fear. She would always have the fear. But she had also learned that the face you show is its own kind of armor, and she kept her face as still as she could make it. "Sit back," he said. "Don't move." He turned back around. Through the windshield, she could see what they were seeing: motorcycles. Not 1 or 2, many. And the road ahead at the mouth of the mountain exit ramp was changing in a way that made no immediate sense, narrowing in a way that had nothing to do with the geography. She gripped the door handle. She told herself to wait. She waited. Oh no. Raven laid the Harley sideways across the road at the apex of the exit ramp and stepped off it in one practiced motion. Behind him, the sound of 50 engines idling was not loud. That was the thing people always misunderstood about real moments of force. They pictured noise, yelling, drama. 50 motorcycles on a mountain exit ramp sounded like a sustained low-frequency hum that you felt more in your chest than heard with your ears. It was the sound of something massive at rest, something that could move if it chose to, but was currently choosing not to. The SUV stopped. It had nowhere to go. Raven walked toward it slowly, his hands visible, his face calm. He was not angry. He was not performing anything. He was just a 52-year-old man with gray in his beard, walking across asphalt in the cold Montana morning, and he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. He stopped at the driver's window. He looked at the driver. He took out his phone and made a call to the Montana State Police that lasted 45 seconds. Then he walked to the rear door. He raised his hand, 3 soft knocks. "My name's Raven." A pause that lasted exactly long enough. "I saw your hand." Another pause. "You get to decide what happens next." On the other side of that door, Claire Whitmore had been holding herself together with something that was thinner than wire and stronger than steel for the last 3 hours. She heard those words. She heard, "I saw your hand." Bone and something inside her that had been clenched for 3 hours that had been clenched. She realized for much longer than 3 hours had maybe been clenched for years, the part of her that worked with women in danger, while always telling herself nothing like that could ever happen to her. Just let go. She was crying before she reached for the lock. She was crying when she heard the click of it opening. She was crying when she pushed the door out into the cold Montana air and found a gray-bearded man standing there who looked at her the way people look at you when they've been waiting for you specifically without knowing your name. Like relief. Like you are the answer to something they asked a long time ago. "You're okay," Raven said. His voice was quiet enough that nobody else could hear it. "You drew the circle. Somebody saw. You're okay." She nodded. She couldn't say anything yet. He didn't ask her to. He just stood there, solid as the mountain behind him, while the sound of 50 engines idling behind him held the world still. The state police arrived 11 minutes after Raven made the call. And 11 minutes is not a long time in most situations. It is an eternity when you are standing on a mountain exit ramp in eastern Montana with two men in a silver SUV who are slowly understanding that their situation has no exit, and 50 motorcycle engines idling behind you like a wall of controlled thunder, and a young woman sitting on the edge of an open car door who is shaking so hard you can see it from 10 feet away. Raven stood between Claire and the SUV the entire time. He didn't pace, he didn't check his phone, he didn't look at his riders or signal to them or manage the situation in any visible way. He just stood there, hands at his sides, face forward positioned, exactly where he needed to be positioned. Book had come up beside him about 3 minutes in, not asking anything, not saying anything, just standing, and the two of them waited together the way men wait when they've run out of things that can be done, and all that's left is the doing. The driver of the SUV had not moved. The passenger had not moved. Raven had expected one of them to try something. Part of him had almost prepared for it. Men in that kind of situation, men with that kind of stillness in their faces usually fell into one of two categories. They either calculated and surrendered, or they calculated and tried anyway. He had watched the driver's hands through the windshield the whole time, watched the passenger's shoulder position, watched the way the weight of the vehicle shifted on its tires when someone inside moved. Nobody tried anything. That told him something. It told him these were not impulsive men. These were men who understood math. And the math of 50 motorcycles on a mountain ramp with no exit was not complicated. Claire had stopped crying by the time the first patrol car came over the rise with its lights going. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, the hand that still had the red circle on it, slightly smeared now from her palm being pressed against her face, and when she saw the cruiser, she exhaled a breath that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than her lungs. Like she had been holding it for years. Like she had been holding it since long before that morning. "You need to sit down," Raven asked. "No," she said, "then yes, maybe." She looked at him. "I don't know what I need." "That's normal." "Have you done this before?" He paused a half beat. "Not exactly like this." She looked at the circle on her trum. "Did you know what it meant right away?" "I knew what it was," he said. "Knowing something and believing it are two different things. Took me about 3 seconds to close the gap." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to her face, but it got close. And the patrol car stopped. 2 officers got out. Another cruiser was already cresting the rise behind it. Raven stepped forward to meet them before they could approach Claire, giving her a few more seconds of breathing room. He had seen how law enforcement sometimes handled these moments, the immediate barrage of questions, the clipboard materializing out of nowhere, the procedural efficiency that was completely necessary and also completely terrible for someone who had just survived something that hadn't finished landing yet. "I made the call," he said to the first officer, a younger man with a serious face who was already reading the scene in front of him with practiced eyes. 2 males in that vehicle. No weapons were displayed. The woman in the back seat indicated distress using a standard trafficking signal about 45 minutes back on E90. "We boxed them in here." The officer looked at Raven, then at the wall of motorcycles, then back at Raven. "You boxed them in," he said. "That's right, with 50 motorcycles, give or take." The officer had the expression of a man whose morning had taken a turn he was still processing. He looked at the SUV, he looked at Claire, he looked at Raven one more time, and they just stopped. "Math," Raven said. The officer blinked. Then he nodded slowly the way people nod when they've decided to understand something later. "Okay, I need you to step back and let us—" "I'm already stepping back," Raven said, and he was. He walked back to where Book was standing, and the two of them watched the officers approach the SUV, watched both doors open when ordered, watched the driver and the passenger step out with their hands visible and their faces doing the particular kind of nothing that guilty people's faces do when the calculation has finally bottomed out. Book said quietly, "You all right?" "Yeah." "You don't look all right." "I'm fine, Book." A pause. "She's young." Raven didn't say anything. "She doing okay?" Raven glanced back at Claire, who was now speaking with a female officer who had come from the second cruiser. Her posture was still tight, still held in, but she was talking steadily. She had the look of someone who was running on adrenaline that hadn't fully processed it was allowed to stop yet. "She drew the circle," Raven said. She held it up at 65 miles an hour through tinted glass on the off chance someone might see it. She was okay before we got here. He looked back at the arrest being processed in front of them. She just needed someone to show up. Book was quiet for a moment. Then, how long were they on the road with her? I don't know yet. But long enough. Yeah, Raven said, long enough. That sat between them like something with physical weight. It was Book who finally broke it. Dutch would have done the same thing you did. Raven said nothing. I mean it. I know you mean it. Raven watched one of the officers lead the passenger toward the back of a cruiser. I'm not thinking about Dutch right now. Usual, he was thinking about Emily. He was always thinking about Emily in moments like this, even when he was actively working to not think about Emily, which was a kind of thinking about someone that never really stopped. Emily at 17, Emily on a highway, Emily holding out her hand to cars that kept passing. Nobody stopping, nobody seeing, nobody making the call. He pulled in a breath through his nose and let it out slow and put Emily back where he kept her. Not gone, never gone, just set aside in the place where the grief lived that was not sharp anymore, but was also not finished. The officer who had spoken to him earlier came back over. Sir, I'm going to need a full statement from you and from how many of your people were directly involved. Define directly. The officer's jaw shifted slightly. Who was on the road when the signal was observed? Just me. The others responded to my call. And you know these individuals? Some of them, Raven said. Some of them I've known for 30 years. Some of them I've never met. The officer wrote something down. They responded to a radio call from you. That's right. And they just came. That's right. The officer wrote something else down. He looked like he was choosing his next question carefully. The woman, Ms. Whitmore, she's indicating that these two individuals have connections to a trafficking network operating across Wyoming and Montana. This is going to be a federal matter. He paused, which means the people who helped stop this vehicle today are going to be part of a federal investigation. Raven didn't blink. Is that a problem? For them, potentially. For the case? The officer looked at the two men now in separate cruisers. No, it's not a problem for the case. Then we'll cooperate with whatever they need. The officer looked at him for a moment, studying him, trying to fit what he was seeing into a framework that made sense, and clearly finding the effort complicated. Can I ask you something personal? The officer said. You can ask. Why you didn't know her. You could have kept writing. You could have told yourself you imagined it. He wasn't being hostile. The question was genuine. Most people would have. Raven considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Most people never get close enough to see the signal, he said finally. I got close enough. After that, it wasn't really a choice. He looked at the officer. Would you have kept riding? The officer was quiet for a second. No. Then you understand. The officer wrote something in his note. Pad and walked away without another word. It was Book who said dry as gravel. Most articulate you've been all year. Shut up, Book. I'm just saying, for a man of famously few words. Book. Shutting up. When they stood there another few minutes while the scene was processed around them. Riders had started quietly dispersing, not all at once, not in any way that looked like a retreat, just gradually filtering back onto the highway the way they had arrived. A few stopped to check in, with Raven brief exchanges, no drama. Danny, a barrel-chested man from the Billings contingent, who had never exchanged more than 30 words with Raven in 5 years, came over, clapped him once on the shoulder, and walked away without saying anything. That was enough. That was more than enough. Claire was still with the female officer when Raven turned to leave. He wasn't going to interrupt that. She had what she needed. The law was here. His part was done. He had almost reached his Harley when he heard her voice behind him. Wait. He stopped. Once she was walking toward him, the female officer, a few steps back, giving her space. Claire's eyes were still slightly red, and her hair was still wind-tangled from the hours in the back of that vehicle, and she was wearing a jacket that wasn't warm enough for the temperature, and she looked like someone who had just survived something and hadn't fully understood yet what surviving it was going to mean for the rest of her life. I need to say something to you, she said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She stopped a few feet in front of him. I want to. He waited. She opened her mouth and then she closed it, and he could see her working against something, not emotion exactly, or not only emotion, but the thing that comes after surviving something, the collision between what you plan to say and the reality that language isn't built for what you're actually trying to communicate. I almost put the marker away, she finally said. Twice. I talked myself out of it twice. I almost convinced myself nobody would see, nobody would know what it meant. It was stupid. I almost put it away. But you didn't. But I didn't. She looked down at her palm, at the smeared red circle. I didn't because a trainer told me once that the alternative to trying is not trying, and not trying is always worse. That's a good trainer. Yeah. She looked up at him. And you almost didn't look, didn't you? You almost told yourself you imagined it. He held her gaze. 3 seconds, he said. She nodded. 3 seconds. She paused. Thank you for not wasting them. He didn't say you're welcome because it felt like the wrong size for what she was saying. He said you did the hard part. She shook her head. I pressed my hand against a window. While 2 men sat 4 feet away, who would have hurt you if they'd seen, Raven said. While you had no phone, no help, no guarantee that anyone would see it or know what it meant. While everything in the situation was telling you to be invisible and compliant and wait it out. He held her gaze. That's not a small thing. She was quiet for a moment. Then what's your real name? Jackson, he said. Jackson Cole. Jackson. She said it like she was testing the weight of it. The officers told me how many riders came, that you called one person and 50 people came. Give or take. Why did they come? They didn't know me either. He thought about how to answer that honestly without it sounding like a speech because he hated speeches. And more importantly, because the honest answer wasn't grand. It was simple. Because someone asked, he said. That's usually enough when the right people are asking. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something he didn't expect. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Not this specifically, but something like this. The accuracy of it hit him before he had time to decide how to receive it. He didn't answer right away. I lost someone, he said, a long time ago. She waited. My sister. She was 17, highway outside Denver. He kept his voice even and flat, the way he always did when he said these words, because flat was the only way he could say them without the whole architecture collapsing. Nobody stopped. Claire's face changed. Not with pity, he would have stepped back from pity. Something more careful than that. Something that understood the difference between a wound and a story and treated what he had said as both. I'm sorry, she said. 24 years ago, he said. But you don't really... No, she said quietly. You don't. They stood there for a moment into the cold, and it was the first time in that whole long morning that the silence felt like something other than a tactical pause. Then her female officer was gently at her elbow, saying they needed to get her to the hospital to be evaluated, and there were federal agents coming who would need to speak with her, and the morning was tilting forward again into everything that came next. Claire nodded. She took a step toward the cruiser, then stopped. Jackson, she said. He looked at her. I work with women who've been through this. She gestured vaguely at the scene around them, the cruisers, the dispersing riders, the SUV still sitting at the apex of the ramp like a monument to a bad calculation. I help them. It's what I do. She paused. I've been thinking about why nobody taught us the signal. Not widely, not in schools, not in rest stops, not in driver's ed. Nobody taught the people who might see it either. She looked at him. That's the gap. Yeah, he said. That's the gap. I'm going to do something about it, she said. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was quieter than that. It was the voice of someone who has just made a decision and is saying it out loud for the first time to hear how it sounds. When this is over, when all the federal stuff and the investigation and whatever this turns into, I'm going to do something about that gap. He nodded. She got in the cruiser. Raven stood there a moment after the door closed. Then he walked back to his Harley righted. It climbed on. Book was already on his bike 10 feet away, engine running, watching him with the patient expression of a man who had long since learned not to ask. You ready? Book said. Raven put on his helmet. Yeah. They rode. The mountain ramp opened by onto I-90, and the sky was slightly brighter now than it had been 2 hours ago, the pewter warming towards something closer to silver, and the interstate stretched ahead of them, empty and wide and indifferent, the way interstates always are, offering nothing and taking nothing. But Raven's hands on the handlebars were different than they had been this morning. He couldn't have explained how, exactly. They were the same hands, the same knuckles scarred from decades of road and weather, and moments he preferred not to inventory. But something in them was different. Something had set down weight they had been carrying for so long, he had stopped noticing it was there. Not gone. He wasn't foolish enough to call it gone. But lighter. He rode. Down behind him, the last of the motorcycles filtered back onto the highway, spreading out naturally, a formation, becoming individuals, becoming just another part of traffic. Nothing to see, nothing that would make anyone look twice. Except that somewhere on a federal database, two men were in the back of separate cruisers being transported toward a situation that was considerably worse than they had calculated at 6:30 that morning. And somewhere in the back of a patrol car heading toward a hospital, a young woman with a smeared red circle on her palm was talking to a female officer, and already even now, even in the middle of surviving, turning over the pieces of an idea. A gap that needed closing. A signal that needed teaching. And somewhere on I-90 moving east, a gray-bearded man on a Harley was thinking about his sister, and for the first time in 24 years, the thinking of her didn't feel only like loss. It felt like something else, too. He couldn't name it yet. But it was there. He rode toward it. The road waited the way it always waited, with the patience of something that has seen everything and is willing to show you one more thing if you keep moving. He kept moving. The federal agents arrived at the hospital before Claire did. That was the first thing that told her how big this actually was. Not 2 agents. 4. 2 from the FBI field office in Billings, 2 from a task force she had never heard of operating out of a federal building in Helena, and all 4 of them had the particular quality of stillness that comes not from calm, but from people who have been looking at something ugly for a long time and have learned to carry it without showing it. Osh, the female officer who had ridden with her, her name was Valdez Claire, had learned in the car. Sandra Valdez, 12 years on the force, mother of 3, had squeezed her hand once before stepping back to let the agents in. That small gesture landed heavier than anything else in the last 3 hours. The squeeze of a stranger's hand saying, "I know. I see you. This next part is going to be hard in a different way." It was. The lead agent was a woman named Carver. Late 40s, dark hair pulled back. Eyes that assessed everything in a room before she said a single word. She sat across from Claire in a small hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and fluorescent light, and she opened a folder and she said, "Ms. Whitmore, I need you to understand that what happened to you this morning was not random." Claire had already known that. Some part of her had known it from the moment she saw the farmhouse and felt the wrongness of it before the door had even opened. But hearing it said out loud by a federal agent with a folder full of papers was different from knowing it. Knowing it was personal. Hearing it out loud made it a fact that existed in the world independent of her. "Tell me about the phone call," Carver said. "The one that brought you to the farmhouse." Claire told her everything. The call coming in through the volunteer organization's emergency line. A young woman's voice frightened, saying her name was Amber, saying she was being held and needed someone to come who wasn't police because she was undocumented and terrified of what would happen if authorities came. Saying she had found the number through a friend, saying, "Please hurry, please come, please don't tell anyone." "That script," Carver said when Claire finished. "The undocumented status, the fear of law enforcement, the urgency. Had you heard it before?" "Variations," Claire said carefully. "In my work, some victims are genuinely, but something felt wrong. Something always feels slightly wrong. You train yourself to go anyway." Claire paused. "Because sometimes it's real." Carver nodded. "This time it was also real, just not in the way you expected." She slid a photograph across the table. "Do you recognize either of these men? The driver, the passenger?" Mugshots, now faces flat and institutional. Claire looked at them for longer than was comfortable, committing them to memory in the way her brain was apparently choosing to do with everything from that morning, whether she wanted it to or not. "The passenger," she said, He's the one who talked to me. His name is Derek Foss, 41. He's been on our radar for 2 years. Carver's voice didn't change when she said it, which somehow made it worse. 2 years. The network he works with has operated across Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. Minimum. We believe there are connections further east, but haven't been able to close the loop. She paused. Until this morning. Because of the arrest. Because of what was in the vehicle, Carver said, and something in her voice shifted by one careful degree. Ms. Whitmore, your phone was in that SUV along with 3 other phones, along with documentation, along with communication records that our digital forensics team is going through right now. She looked at Claire steadily. This morning's arrest didn't just stop what was happening to you. It cracked open something we have been trying to crack for 24 months. Claire sat with that for a moment. She thought about Raven, about 3 seconds on a highway, about a red marker in a tote bag that they hadn't bothered to search. The men who planned this, she said, the ones who set up the call, who scripted the Amber story, where are they? Carver held her gaze. That's what we're working on. Which meant we don't have them yet, which meant this wasn't over. Claire felt the room shift slightly the way rooms do when information arrives that changes the geometry of everything in them. Am I in danger? She said. Not as a question, as a thing she was saying out loud to make it real enough to deal with. We're taking precautions, Carver said. That's not what I asked. Monte Carver held her gaze. The men who ran this network knew your name before this morning. They targeted you specifically. Whether that targeting continues now that Foss and his partner are in custody depends on how connected the network is and how much they value operational security over. She stopped. Started again. Yes, we're taking it seriously. Claire's hands were flat on the table in front of her. She looked at them. The smeared red circle was still there. Faint now, the edges gone soft, but the shape still legible. She thought about how she had almost wiped it off in the cruiser. Had stopped herself without knowing exactly why She was glad she had stopped herself. I need to make a call, she said. To whom? My organization, my supervisor. People are going to be worried. We've already contacted, not the official contact, my supervisor. She met Carver's eyes. Please. Carver nodded and stepped out. Claire settled in the small room for the first time since the ramp, and the silence was a different kind of silence than the one she had sat in during those 2 hours in the back of the SUV. That silence had been imposed from outside, had been a cage she was sitting inside. This silence was her own. She was inside it by choice, and she could end it whenever she wanted, and that difference, small as it might have seemed to someone watching from outside, was enormous. She breathed into it. She thought about what Carver had said. They targeted you specifically. She turned that over. She had been doing volunteer work with trafficking survivors for 6 years. She had helped write protocols that were used in 4 states. She had testified in front of a state legislature about gaps in the reporting system. She had made herself professionally a person who knew things about the way this network operated. And somewhere in that network, someone had noticed. It was a terrible kind of recognition, being seen by the wrong people for doing the right thing. Her hand closed around the phone Carver had left on the table. She almost called her supervisor. Instead, she found herself thinking about something Raven had said on the ramp. That's the gap. She had been the one to say it first, but he had confirmed it, like he'd been sitting with the same thought for years. The signal existed. A few people knew it. But the chain between the person sending the signal and the person receiving it had too many missing links. Not enough people who knew how to send it, not enough people who knew how to see it. She had drawn the circle on a highway in eastern Montana at 65 miles an hour, and exactly one person out of everyone on that road had known what it meant. 1. What if it had been 0? She sat with that. What if it had been 0? The phone was in her hand before she fully decided to pick it up. She called her supervisor, a woman named Ruth Calloway, who had been running their volunteer organization for 15 years and had the voice of someone who had heard everything and still chose to keep answering the phone every morning. Ruth picked up on the second ring. Claire, we got the federal call. Are you hurt? No, I'm okay. I'm at the hospital for evaluation, but I'm okay. What happened? Claire told her. Shorter version than she'd told Carver. Faster. She was already processing this differently, Not as something that had happened to her, or not only that, but as data, as information about a gap. When she finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. The man who saw the signal, the biker. Jackson Cole goes by Raven. He's the chapter president. He knew what the circle meant. He'd been trained 3 years ago by a nonprofit, one presentation, one training session. Claire paused. Ruth, he said he'd thought about it 100 times in 3 years without ever needing it. And when he needed it, it was there. I hear what you're saying. How many people on that highway this morning had no idea what that signal meant? Ruth was quiet. Hundreds, Claire said, maybe more. I pressed my hand against the glass for 2 seconds, and one person saw it, and one person knew it. One. She felt her voice tightening and deliberately loosened it. We have to fix that. Claire, you were in that SUV 8 hours ago. 6 hours ago, and yes, I know, but this is the thing I'm going to do with it, Ruth. I already know that. She paused. I knew it on the ramp. Another silence. Then Ruth said quietly, okay, when you're ready. I'll be ready faster than you think. She hung up. The federal agent came back in and they spent another 2 hours going through everything. The call, the farmhouse, approach, the men, the drive, the signal, the ramp. Claire answered every question completely and accurately, and with the part of her brain that processed trauma by turning it into information that could be used. She had learned to do that from the women she helped. Some of them were the most practical people she had ever met, not despite what had happened to them, but because of how they had chosen to carry it. It was late afternoon by the time Carver finally closed her folder. One more thing, Carver said. She hesitated in a way that Carver clearly did not do often, the hesitation of someone choosing words with unusual care. The man who made the call this morning, Jackson Cole. What about him? Do you know much about his history? Claire looked at her. He told me he lost his sister 24 years ago, highway outside Denver. Carver's expression shifted, not dramatically, just a slight compression around the eyes that meant she was receiving information and filing it somewhere significant. Emily Cole, she said. Claire went still. You know about her? Emily Cole's disappearance was a cold case for 20 years. 2 years ago, a federal investigation into a trafficking network operating in Colorado and Wyoming, a different network than the one we're looking at today, but connected, turned up records that included her name. Carver's voice was very careful. She was recovered. Alive. The word hung in the room. Alive. Claire stared at Carver. She was what? She's alive, Ms. Whitmore. She's been living in Albuquerque for 11 years. She rebuilt her life. She chose not to be found, which is her legal right, but the investigation flagged the connection. Carver paused. Jackson Cole does not know. The room felt like it had changed its dimensions. Claire stopped, started again. Does she know he's been? We don't know what she knows. Does someone need to? That's a conversation that requires extraordinary care. Carver looked at her, and it's not mine to have, but someone will need to facilitate it if both parties want that, in a way that protects her choices. She paused. I'm telling you because you seem to be someone who handles information responsibly. Claire looked down at her hand, the smeared red circle, Raven standing on a mountain ramp saying I lost someone in a flat voice that was the flattest voice she had ever heard from a human being, which was how she had known it was the most painful. Emily was alive, and he didn't know. She made the decision in about 4 seconds. Not to tell him, not yet, not herself, not without knowing what Emily wanted, not without understanding the full shape of what this meant for two people who had been separated by something monstrous for 2.5 decades. But to not let it disappear, to not let it become a file in a drawer somewhere. I understand the care that's needed, she told Carver. I also understand that this man spent 24 years thinking his sister was gone. Her voice was steady. She made sure of it. Someone needs to find out what Emily wants. I agree. And not in 6 months, not when the investigation wraps up. Now, while this is all still, while he's still, she couldn't finish the sentence exactly. While he's still in the feeling of it, while this morning is still alive in him, while the weight he set down on that highway is still light enough to notice. Soon, she said instead. It needs to happen soon. Carver looked at her for a long moment. "I'll make the call today," she said. Claire nodded. Outside, the afternoon had moved on without her. That was always the strange thing about these kinds of days, the world running its ordinary schedule, while something seismic happens inside a hospital room, and then you walk back out into it, and the afternoon light is slanted and familiar and completely indifferent to what you now know. Officer Valdez was still there, waiting in a chair in the hallway with a coffee cup and her phone, the patient posture of someone who decided to stay and simply stayed. She stood when she saw Claire. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I have no idea," Claire said honestly. Valdez nodded like that was the right answer. "Car's out front when you're ready. We're putting you up somewhere safe tonight. No argument." "No argument," Claire agreed. Well, they walked out together, and in the parking lot before she got in the car, Claire stopped for one moment. Just one. She looked at the sky, she looked at her hand. She thought about a man on a highway in Montana who had 3 seconds and chose correctly. She thought about what she now knew that he didn't. She thought about a woman in Albuquerque who had rebuilt her life and who was about to learn that her brother had spent 24 years not looking away. She thought about this gap, the signal, the red circle on a palm at 65 miles an hour, how close it all was, how close everything always was to going the other way. She got in the car. She held her hand in her lap, the circle facing up, and she did not look away from it the entire drive. The chapter meeting that Tuesday night was the quietest one Raven could remember in 9 years of running it. Not because nothing had happened, because too much had. The room had 42 men in it, which was more than a regular Tuesday word, had spread the way word always spreads through a chapter, through phone calls and gas station conversations, in the particular telegraph of men who spend enough time together that information moves between them like weather. Everyone knew the broad shape of the morning. Some of them had been there. Some had heard it secondhand. All of them had showed up. Nobody was celebrating. That was the thing about men who had actually been in situations, real situations, the kind with weight and consequence. They didn't celebrate the way people in movies celebrated. They came in, they sat down. They were quiet in the specific way that meant they were still processing, still running the morning through their heads, still feeling the hum of 50 engines on a mountain ramp in their chests. Raven sat at the head of the table and looked at them and said, "Everybody did right today." That was it. That was the whole speech. Book, sitting 2 seats down, raised his coffee cup slightly. A few others nodded. And then they moved on to chapter business, the ordinary, necessary machinery of running an organization, and Raven let the ordinariness of it do what ordinariness always does after something extreme. Settle things, return them to scale. He stayed after everyone left. That was his habit. He always stayed, turning off lights, checking locks, the way he'd done since Dutch handed him the keys to this place 9 years ago, and said, "Last one out closes the door." Every time. No exceptions. It was not complicated stewardship, but it was consistent, and Raven had come to believe that consistent was the most underrated word in the English language. He was putting on his jacket when his phone rang. Mama, unknown number. Montana area code he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. "Cole," he said. A pause. Then a woman's voice, not young, not old, carefully neutral in the way of someone who has professional reasons to keep their voice that way. "Mr. Cole, my name is Agent Carver, FBI Field Office Billings. I spoke with Ms. Whitmore today at the hospital." He sat back down. "Is she all right?" "She's safe. She's being housed at a secure location tonight." A pause. "I'm calling about something else." Something in her tone, that single careful degree of shift he had learned to read in people who carried information that was going to change the shape of a conversation, made his hand tighten around the phone. "Okay," he said. Mr. Cole, as part of our investigation into the network involved in today's incident, we've been reviewing case files from a connected investigation that closed approximately 2 years ago in Colorado and Wyoming." Another pause, the kind of pause that is not hesitation, but preparation. "Your sister's name came up." The room did not move. The air did not move. Raven sat completely still and felt the world rearrange itself around those 5 words. "Your sister's name came up." "Emily," he said. The word came out flat and strange, the way words sound when you say them in a language you learn to speak under conditions of extreme pressure. Yes, you found what happened to her. Mr. Cole, Carver's voice was very careful now. Emily Cole is alive. He heard the words. He heard them completely and understood them grammatically and could parse every syllable. And then something happened that had never happened to Raven in 52 years of a life that had contained 2 wars and multiple losses and 31 years of roads and situations. His mind went completely blank. Not quiet. Blank, like a screen that has lost its signal. Like the space between lightning and thunder. Say that again, he said. Your sister is alive, Mr. Cole. She's been living in Albuquerque, New Mexico for the past 11 years. She rebuilt her life after Carver stopped. She went through things I'm not in a position to detail without her consent. But she survived. She built a life. She is alive. The blank lasted another 3 seconds. Then something came rushing into the space where the blank had been, and it was not one thing, it was everything simultaneously. 24 years of grief and guilt, and Tuesday morning rides, and the way his mother's face had looked in the last years of her life, and his father turning into a different man, and Emily's laugh in a restaurant, and the way she had their mother's eyes and the red circle on Claire's palm, and the mountain ramp and 50 engines and the feeling of setting something down. Nimoy, all of it at once in the space of 3 seconds. She's alive, he said. He said it to hear it again, to make it exist in his own voice. Yes, 24 years. Yes. Does she? He stopped. The question was enormous. He broke it into smaller pieces. Does she know does she know what happened to our family? I don't know what she knows, Carver said. What I know is that her survival required her to disappear completely. That was a choice she made under circumstances that would have made almost any choice reasonable. Her voice was as careful as he'd ever heard anyone's voice. She has the legal right to her privacy and her choices. What I can tell you is that someone in my position will reach out to her, has already initiated that process today to ask what she wants, whether she wants contact, whether she's ready. A pause. That is her decision to make. I know, Raven said. I want to be clear, I'm not promising you. I know, he said again. Steady. He was working very hard at steady. I understand what you're telling me. You're telling me she's alive. You're telling me the rest is hers. He breathed. That's right. That's exactly right. Carver was quiet for a moment. You're taking this better than most people would. I'm not taking it well, he said. I'm taking it quietly. Those are different things. Yes, she said, they are. He asked 2 more questions. Practical ones. When would they reach out to Emily? What was the timeline on the investigation? He stored the answers without processing them because processing would come later in layers over days and weeks, and probably years. Right now, he just needed the facts to exist somewhere he could find them. He thanked Carver. He hung up. He sat in the empty meeting room for a long time. He didn't move. He didn't call Book. He didn't go outside. He just sat in the chair at the head of the table where he'd sat 100 Tuesday nights in a room that smelled like old coffee and motor oil, in the particular density of too many men in a space for too long, and he let the information exist in the room with him. Emily was alive. The thing he had carried for 24 years, the thing that wasn't grief exactly, because grief is for the confirmed dead, and what he'd carried was something worse, was the open-ended weight of not knowing the perpetual present tense of a disappearance that never became a story with an ending. That thing had just changed its shape. It wasn't gone. It would never be on their own. 24 years of it didn't evaporate with a phone call, but it had changed. He pressed his hands flat on the table in front of him. He thought about this morning, about the highway, about a hand pressed against glass with a red circle on the palm, about 3 seconds. He thought about Emily on a highway 24 years ago. He thought about whatever stranger had or hadn't been on that road, whether anyone had seen, whether anyone had known what seeing meant. He thought about the gap Claire had named on the ramp. He sat with all of it until it settled into something he could carry without it carrying him. Then he stood up, turned off the lights, and locked the door. Every time. No exceptions. He sat on his bike in the parking lot for 10 minutes without starting it. Above him, the Montana sky was doing what Montana skies did at night, going so vast and dark and star-thick that it stopped feeling like a sky and started feeling like a fact about the scale of things. He had always found it either terrifying or comforting, and tonight it was both simultaneously, which felt appropriate. He started the engine. He rode home. He did not sleep. Well, he sat into the kitchen with the lights low and a cup of coffee he didn't drink, and he thought about Emily the way he hadn't allowed himself to think about her in years, not as the absence of her, not as the guilt of her, but as a person, as his sister. The specific weight of her laugh, the way she'd argued, the way she'd been stubborn about the wrong things and right about the important ones. The way she'd been 17 and impossible and completely herself in the way that teenagers are themselves before the world starts negotiating with them. She was 41 now. He had no idea who she was at 41. That thought hit him in a way he hadn't expected. Not painful exactly, just the scope of it. 24 years of a person he didn't know. 24 years of experiences and choices and a rebuilt life in Albuquerque. An entire person existing in the world that he had not been part of making. He wanted to know her. He wanted to know her so badly it felt like a physical sensation, like pressure behind his sternum. He also understood with a clarity that was hard-won through the specific discipline of being a man who had spent 31 years learning that wanting something was not the same as being owed it, that what he wanted was not the point. What Emily wanted was the point. What Emily needed was the point. Whatever she had built in Albuquerque, she had built it on the foundation of her own choices about her own survival. He was not going to be the thing that arrived and disrupted that foundation without an invitation. Not after 24 years. Not after everything. He would wait. He was good at waiting. He had learned it from a road that had always been willing to wait for him. He waited 3 days. But on the fourth day, his phone rang at 7 in the morning. He was already up, already had coffee, was sitting in the same kitchen chair he'd been sitting in when Carver called. He didn't know if that was coincidence or if some part of him had been keeping himself available in that specific place for a reason he hadn't consciously articulated. Unknown number, New Mexico area code. He looked at it for 2 full rings. He picked up. "Hello," he said. Silence for a moment. A breath. Then a voice he had not heard in 24 years and recognized instantly in the way you recognize things that are written into you before language, before memory, before the part of you that learns things, the part of you that simply knows them. "Jackson," she said, his name in her voice. He gripped the phone. "Emily," he said. Another silence, not empty, full, packed with 24 years and 2 people on either side of them. "I didn't know if I would call," she said. "I decided about 4 times not to. But you called." "I called." A pause. How are you? It was such a normal question, such an ordinary human, utterly insufficient question for the circumstances, and he loved her for it, immediately loved the normalness of it, the way it was a door being open, just wide enough to see if there was light on the other side. "I'm okay," he said. I'm okay." He stopped, started again. "Emily, I need you to know I'm not going to." He was not a man who lost sentences. He found the end of this one with effort. "I'm not going to ask you for anything. I just need to hear you're okay." "I'm okay," she said, and then quieter. "I've been okay for a while. It took a long time to be okay." "I know. Do you?" He heard the edge in it, not hostile, honest. The edge of a woman who had survived something that her brother had not survived with her and who was not going to pretend that the distance between those 2 experiences didn't exist. "No," he said, "I don't. Not really." He breathed. "I know what I went through not knowing. I don't know what you went through living it." A pause. "That's a better answer," she said. "I've had 4 days to think about what to say. I've had 4 days to think about whether to say anything at all." Her voice was steadier now, finding its footing. "The agent who called me Carver, she told me what happened. On the highway." Another pause. "She told me about the woman and the signal and you." "Okay." "Jackson," his name again, 2 syllables that contained everything. "Were you thinking about me when you saw it?" He didn't answer immediately. He turned the question over. He gave it the honesty it deserved. I was thinking about a hand pressed against glass, he said, and about what it meant that someone needed to use that signal and nobody was stopping. He paused. You're always somewhere in that thought. Yeah. The sound she made was not quite a word. It was something smaller than a word and larger than silence. Mom, she said finally. Dad? Mom passed 9 years ago. Dad 7 years before that. He heard her breathe. I knew, she said. I found out. I couldn't. She stopped. I couldn't come back for it. I couldn't be that person yet. I know. You don't, Jackson. You keep saying you know. Emily. His voice was very quiet. I'm not saying I know what it was like for you. I'm saying I'm not going to hold anything against you. Any of it. Whatever you needed to do to survive, whatever you needed to do to build whatever you built, none of that is something I'm holding. He stopped. I'm just glad you're on the phone. Silence. Then I have a daughter. The kitchen shifted. Her name is Rose. She's 9. Another pause, and he heard in the pause the specific vulnerability of a mother deciding how much to give. She doesn't know everything. She knows I had a hard time before she was born. She knows her mom is strong. A beat. She makes me think about what strong actually means. Every day. Raven pressed his free hand flat on the table. She sounds like you, he said. The way I remember you. Don't make me cry before 8 in the morning. Sorry. No, you're not. No, he agreed, I'm not. Something broke open in that exchange, small, like the first crack in ice when the temperature is turning, and on the other side of it, they were just two people talking imperfectly and carefully, and with enormous amounts of unsaid things surrounding every said thing, but talking. They stayed on the phone for an hour and 40 minutes. He found out she had a job she loved. She worked with an organization in Albuquerque, helping women navigate legal systems, had gotten a paralegal certification, had been doing it for 6 years. He found out Rose liked horses and had recently decided she wanted to be a marine biologist, which Emily said made no geographical sense given where they lived, but that she was not going to be the person who told a 9-year-old her ambitions were geographically inconvenient. He told her about the chapter, about Dutch dying, about the Tuesday rides, about the meeting room he locked up every week, every time. She said, that sounds like you. He said, it sounds like what Dutch taught me. She said, it sounds like what you already were. At 1 hour and 20 minutes, she said, I'm not ready to see you. I want you to know it's not about not wanting to. It's about needing time to figure out what that looks like. Take whatever time you need. You've been waiting 24 years. I don't want you to think. Emily. He was gentle, but absolute. I have been waiting 24 years to know you were alive. Now I know. The rest is yours, however long it takes and whatever it looks like. He paused. I'll be here. She was quiet. The woman, she said finally. Claire, the agent said she talked to you on the ramp. Yes. She's going to do something about the signal, making it more known. That's what she said. Good. A pause. I've thought about signals a lot, about what I had and didn't have, about what might have. She stopped. Let the sentence go unfinished. He understood. Good, she said again. That's good. Yeah, he said. It is. They said goodbye in the way of people who are not done talking, but have reached the end of what this particular conversation can hold. Careful. Real. He sat in the kitchen after she hung up for a long time. He thought about a red circle on a palm. He thought about how Claire had almost put the marker away. Twice. He thought about his own 3 seconds. He thought about Emily at 9 years old following him around the house, making him crazy, and Emily at 17 with her mother's eyes, and Emily now 41 in Albuquerque with a daughter named Rose who wanted to be a marine biologist. He thought about how everything, all of it, the morning on the highway, the ramp, the federal call, and now this phone call at 7 in the morning in a kitchen in Montana traced back to one thing. One moment, one person choosing to hold their hand up against the glass, and one person choosing to look. He thought about what Claire had said was the gap, the missing links in the chain between the person sending the signal and the person able to receive it. He picked up his phone. He called Book. You're up early, Book said. I need to tell you something, Raven said, and then I need to ask you something. Okay. Emily is alive. The silence on Book's end lasted long enough that Raven counted it. 7 seconds. Say that again, Book said. Emily is alive. She's in Albuquerque. She has a daughter. I spoke with her this morning. He kept his voice even. He would not be even forever about this. He already knew there were days coming when even would not be possible, but right now he was even. She's alive, Book. Another silence. He heard Book exhale long and shaking the breath of a man who had watched his friend carry something for 30 years and had never found a way to help carry it. God, Book said. Just that. One word that held everything. Yeah. I'm okay. He paused. I'm better than okay. I don't have a word for what I am. You don't need one. No, he breathed. The thing I need to ask you. Claire Whitmore, the woman from the highway, she's going to start something. Teaching the signal, making it something people actually know. He paused. I want to help. Help how? However we can. Riders across the chapter. Riders across chapters. We are on those roads every day, Book. All of us. Every Tuesday and every other day of the week. He paused. Darnell Harris trained us 3 years ago, and 1 person in 50 retained it. What if we changed that number? What if we made it a thing we taught, not just in our chapter, in every chapter willing to listen? Book was quiet for a moment. You know how many people are going to have opinions about Hell's Angels partnering with an anti-trafficking nonprofit? I know exactly how many, Raven said, and I know how many of those opinions I care about. Which is none. Book made a sound that in another context might have been a laugh. All right, a pause. All right, Raven, yeah, let's do that. He hung up. He finally drank the cold coffee. He sat in the kitchen of a Tuesday that had started with a phone call from his sister and was going to continue into a chapter history that was just beginning to understand what it was capable of. Outside, the Montana morning was moving at its usual speed, which was to say the speed of something that does not need to hurry because it has always had time. He had always loved that about it. The way the land out here moved at a pace that made human urgency feel like a temporary condition. But he was done with temporary. He was done with waiting in the way that waiting is a form of surviving rather than living. Emily was alive and had a daughter named Rose, who wanted to be a marine biologist and worked in a state that had no ocean, and somewhere in a safe location in Montana, Claire Whitmore was waking up to the first morning of the rest of her life, having survived something that was going to become, knowing her, the foundation of something larger. And he had things to do. He stood it up, put the cup in the sink, put on his jacket. He had things to do. 6 months after the morning on A90, Claire Whitmore stood in front of 230 people in a community center in Billings, Montana, and drew a red circle on her palm. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way you do something when you want everyone in the room to understand that the gesture is not a demonstration, but a memory. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when something real is happening. She held up her hand. This, she said, is what saved my life. She had given versions of this talk 11 times in the past 6 months. School auditoriums, truck stop training sessions, a women's shelter in Cheyenne, a law enforcement conference in Helena, where half the room had been skeptical, walking in, and quiet in a different way walking out. Each time she gave it, she found something new in it, some layer she hadn't known was there, some connection between what had happened on the highway and what she was trying to build from it that she hadn't seen clearly before. But this night was different, because Raven was in the back of the room. She had spotted him the moment she walked in, helmet in hand, standing against the back wall with the particular stillness of a man who intends to remain unnoticed. He was not alone. Book was beside him, and flanking them on both sides, spread quietly along the back wall like they had simply materialized. There were 14 riders she recognized from the ramp. They had not told her they were coming. She kept talking. She told the story, her version of it, the one that started with a phone call about a girl named Amber and ended on a mountain ramp with 3 soft knocks on a car door. She told it without dramatics, without the false elevation that stories sometimes get when people perform them rather than tell them. She told it the way it happened. Flat in some places, sharp in others, real throughout. Lesson, she talked about the gap, about how she had drawn the circle at 65 miles an hour, and one person in however many hundreds of vehicles were on that highway had known what it meant. She talked about what one meant. She talked about what it would mean if one became 10, if 10 became 100, if the chain between the person sending the signal and the person able to receive it stopped having so many missing links. She talked about what it cost to almost put the marker away. And when she finished the room, held its silence for a moment longer than applause usually waits. Then it started, not the polite kind, but the kind that means something landed. You answered questions for 20 minutes. Good questions. Hard ones. A woman in the third row asked, what do you do if you see the signal and you're alone and you're scared? A truck driver in the back asked about the right way to call it in without tipping off the driver. A teenager, maybe 15, sitting with what looked like her mother, raised her hand and asked, what if the person in the car is my age? What if they're scared? I won't believe them. Claire looked at her for a moment. You believe them first, she said. You ask questions later. Always believe them first. The girl nodded slowly, like she was filing that away somewhere permanent. After the room began to empty, Claire worked her way toward the back wall. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. She had been not sure what she was going to say for 6 months, which was how long she had known what she knew about Emily, and how long she had been sitting with the weight of knowing something that was not hers to tell. That weight had shifted 3 weeks ago. Emily had called her. She still wasn't entirely sure how Emily had gotten her number, probably through Carver, probably with deliberate intention, but the call had come on a Thursday evening, and Claire had answered it, and the woman on the other end had said, my name is Emily. I think you know who I am. I do, Claire had said. Then you know what I've been thinking about. I have an idea? Emily's voice on the phone was nothing like what Claire had expected, though she couldn't have said exactly what she'd expected. It was direct, measured, with a quality underneath the measurement that was not quite warmth, but was something adjacent to it, the quality of a person who has decided that everything she gives is given on purpose and nothing is wasted. I've been following what you're building, Emily had said, the campaign, the signal training. It's still small. It's growing. I looked at your numbers. A pause. I want to be part of it, not publicly, not yet. But I have skills. I work in legal support. I know how systems work. I know where the gaps are beyond the signal itself. Another pause. And I think it matters that someone who survived is part of building the thing that might help the next person survive. Claire had said, I would be honored. Emily had said, don't be honored yet. I'm difficult to work with. I have opinions about everything, and I'm right about most of them. Claire had laughed, actually laughed, the first real laugh she could remember since before the farmhouse, and said, I have the same problem. Emily had said, dry as desert air. Then we'll be fine. They had talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, they had the outline of a working relationship that was also the outline of something else, something that didn't have a clean name, but felt like two people who had been shaped by the same morning, from opposite directions, finding that the shapes fit together. Before she hung up, Emily had said one more thing. I'm going to see my brother. A pause. I'm not ready to say when, but I wanted you to know, since you were there at the beginning of it. Claire had said, he's been waiting. Emily had said, I know, that's why I'm going. Now in the community center in Billings, Claire reached the back wall and stopped in front of Raven. He looked the same as he had on the ramp, same gray beard, same broad shoulders, same quality of stillness. But something in his face was different from the man she had seen 6 months ago standing at the door of a silver SUV, making a calm phone call to state police. Something had shifted in him, not dramatically, not in a way a stranger would notice. She noticed. You didn't tell me you were coming, she said. Didn't want to make it about us being here, he said. Tonight was yours. It's everyone's, she said. That's the point. He almost smiled. Almost. Fair. Book leaned forward from beside him. For what it's worth, that was the best talk I've heard since a man named Dutch told a room full of 20-year-olds that a road will wait for you, but your integrity won't. He paused. And I've been thinking about that one for 30 years. I'll take that, Claire said. She looked at Raven. How are you, she asked. Meaning everything. Meaning Emily. Meaning the 6 months. Meaning all of it. He looked at her for a moment. I spoke with her again last week, he said. Third call. His voice was careful with it, the way you are careful with things that are still new and still fragile and still real. She told me about her daughter, Mus. The name landed differently in his voice than other words did. Softer. 9 years old, wants to be a marine biologist. In New Mexico, Claire said. His eyebrows went up slightly. She told you? She told me when we spoke, about a month ago. She watched his face. She reached out to me. We've been talking about the campaign. She wants to be involved. He was quiet for a moment, processing. She watched him take it in the information that the two women in this story had found each other, that something was already being built that included all of them. Of course she does, he said, finally. And there it was, the full smile this time, the one she hadn't seen on the ramp, the one that changed the whole geography of his face. She was always the one who showed up. Sounds like a family trait, Claire said. He looked at her. She held up her palm. Wushu, this red circle was there. Not the smeared, desperate one from 6 months ago on a Montana highway, but a fresh one drawn deliberately before the talk, a reminder to herself of what this whole thing was built on. He looked at it. She's coming, he said, not a question. He knew. The way people know things when the shape of events has been moving in a direction long enough that the destination becomes visible. She didn't say when, Claire said. She'll come when she's ready. He kept looking at the circle on her palm. She was always stubborn about timing, did everything on her own schedule. A pause. Drove our mother insane. Another pause, and this one held something more complex, the sweet, sharp combination of a memory that is joyful and painful at the same time that cannot be one without the other. I used to think it was a flaw. And now I think it's why she survived. The community center was mostly empty by then. Volunteers were stacking chairs, the sound of ordinary life moving through the space. Claire lowered her hand. The federal case, she said. Carver updated me last week. They're up to 16 arrests across 3 states. I heard. It started with a tote bag they didn't search and a red marker. It started with a woman who didn't put the marker away, Raven said. She accepted that, let it sit. We're launching the formal campaign next month, she said. National rollout. We have partners in 22 states, truck stop networks, schools, women's organizations. She paused. And biker chapters. 14 confirmed so far, he said. Book's been making calls. She looked at Book, who shrugged modestly. I have a lot of numbers, Book said. 14 chapters, Claire said. That's how many riders. Combined, Book did mental math. Somewhere around 800 who've committed to learning the signal training. More who will come in once we run the first regional session. 800 riders on American roads who would know what to do when they saw a hand pressed against glass. The number sat in the room and expanded. Claire thought about what one had meant on the highway 6 months ago. One rider who knew, one person who saw. 800. Then more. Then whatever came after more. She thought about the teenager in the 3rd row tonight who was going to go home and tell her friends. She thought about the truck driver who was going to text his CB network. She thought about the woman in the shelter who was already asking how she could teach the women in her group. She thought about every person who had left this room tonight carrying a piece of information they hadn't walked in with. The chain between sending and receiving. Link by link. I want to show you something, Raven said. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a red marker. She looked at it. Every rider we train gets one, he said. Not to keep, to give to someone else, driver, passenger, daughter, friend, stranger at a rest stop. He turned it in his hand. The idea is it doesn't stay with us. It moves. She stared at the marker. And she thought about her marker in the side pocket of a tote bag that 2 men hadn't bothered to search. She thought about the weight of it in her hand when she uncapped it. She thought about drawing the circle, slowly pressing hard to make it dark. She thought about all the decisions that had led to that moment and all the decisions that had come after it. She took the marker from his hand. Can I? She said. He held out his palm. She drew the circle. She drew it carefully the way she had drawn the one on her own palm 6 months ago, with full attention but the understanding of what the gesture meant. When she finished, she capped the marker and looked at his hand. He looked at it too. His jaw was tight in the way of someone who is not going to let themselves be undone in a community center in Billings, Montana, and is working to maintain that position with reasonable success. Guess more people are learning to look, he said. His voice was quiet. She recognized the phrase. She had said something like it to him on the ramp, though the circumstances were different then. He was completing something. Closing a circle, the real kind, not the one on his palm. A lot more, she said. They stood there for a moment in the emptying room. Two people who had been changed by the same Tuesday morning from completely different angles, who had built something from the residue of what that morning had cost them both, who were standing in the early evidence that what they had built was going to matter. Book said into the silence quietly, Dutch would have said something smart right now. Dutch would have said he was hungry and who's buying dinner, Raven said. That is also smart, Claire laughed. And the three of them walked out of the community center into the Montana night, and the air was cold and clear, and smelled like winter coming, and ahead of them the parking lot was ordinary and lit, and completely unremarkable. And that was fine, because the remarkable things had already happened, and were still happening, and would keep happening in truck stops and schools and women's shelters and chapter meetings across 22 states every time someone drew a circle on a palm and someone else knew what it meant. So 2 months later, on a Thursday afternoon in November, a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot of the chapter meeting house. Raven was out front doing exactly nothing, just sitting on the steps, coffee in hand, no particular reason. Just one of those moments when a man ends up somewhere without planning it. The sedan sat for a moment. Then the driver's door opened. A woman got out, 41 years old, dark hair now instead of the blonde she'd had at 17. Their mother's eyes. She stood by the car and looked at him across the parking lot. He stood up. He didn't move toward her. He let her set the pace. He had promised himself that, and he kept promises. She walked across the parking lot. She stopped 3 feet in front of him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. There was too much to say, and the too muchness of it made all the individual pieces feel inadequate. So they stood in it, in the weight of 24 years in one parking lot in a Thursday afternoon in November. That was ordinary in every way except this. Then Emily reached into her coat pocket and took out a red marker. She uncapped it. She drew a small, neat circle on her palm. She held it up. He looked at it. He looked at her. I saw your hand, he said. His voice broke on the last word, and he let it break because some things are not meant to be said in a flat voice, and this was one of them. She stepped forward, and he put his arms around his sister for the first time in 24 years, and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying. The red circle on her palm pressed against his back and held. Some stories end with a headline. Some end with a verdict. Some end with a number, arrest made, cases closed, statistics that measure the size of what was stopped. This one ends here with two people standing in a parking lot in Montana, one circle between them. Everything that was lost accounted for, and everything that was found still being understood. Because that is what happens when someone chooses to hold up their hand, and someone else chooses not to look away.